June 23, 1995. The Sierra Madre Mountains cut across the border of Jalisco and Nayarit. A small private aircraft drops through the afternoon heat. It doesn't land cleanly. The plane slams into the hillside. Mexican authorities reach the wreckage. Among the survivors, bloodied, pulled from the debris, is one man. No uniform, no badge, no official title. But for the past decade, he'd moved through Mexico like he had all three. His name is Hector Luis Palma Salazar. The Americans know him from a 1995 federal indictment for cocaine conspiracy. The cartels know him as El Güero Palma, co-founder of the Sinaloa faction, close partner of El Chapo Guzman, a man who built his power on trafficking corridors, corrupt police networks, and the kind of personal violence that becomes legend. His arrest should have been the end of the story. It wasn't even close. Because to understand how El Güero Palma got on that plane, you've got to go back to when he was just another ambitious kid from Sinaloa. And to understand why his arrest barely slowed anything down, you need to understand the system he helped build. A system so deeply woven into Mexican institutions that it could survive without him. And a war so personal, so brutal, it would follow him for the next 30 years. Chapter 1. The world he grew up in. Sinaloa, Mexico, 1960s and 70s. The Sierra Madre Occidental runs through the state like a spine. Up in the mountain valleys, poppy fields had been feeding U.S. heroin markets since the 1940s. Drug cultivation wasn't some underground secret here. It was an economic reality built into the landscape. The men who ran those supply lines didn't look like criminals to the people around them. They looked like the people who had money. By the late 1970s, one organization had consolidated most of that power. The Guadalajara Cartel, run by Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, controlled the major trafficking corridors between Mexico and the United States. And Felix Gallardo wasn't just a trafficker. He was a systems builder. He negotiated directly with Colombian cocaine suppliers, bribed federal police commanders, and assigned specific geographic routes to trusted operators. The cartel ran less like a criminal gang and more like a logistics company, with an enforcement division. Hector Palma entered that world in the late 1970s. A reported 1978 arrest in Arizona for drug trafficking put him on the U.S. radar early. By the mid-1980s, he was working inside the Guadalajara network. Not as muscle, not as a courier, as an operator. And inside that network, he found the alliance that would define the rest of his life. A young trafficker from the same region, ambitious, strategic, already building a reputation, Joaquin Guzman Loera, El Chapo. What happened next between these two men would eventually reshape organized crime across the entire continent. But first, the system they both worked inside was about to collapse. Chapter 2. The Collapse and the Alliance. In 1989, Mexican federal police arrested Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. The Guadalajara cartel didn't survive it. And what happened next wasn't a vacuum. It was a partition. Felix Gallardo reportedly coordinated the split from prison, dividing Mexico's trafficking corridors among his most trusted lieutenants. The Arellano Felix brothers got Tijuana and the northwest border crossings into California. Other factions received their own corridors. Palma and Guzman aligned together and locked in on Sinaloa. The corridor they controlled ran through some of the most productive drug-producing territory in Mexico. But the partition wasn't clean. The Tijuana corridor was more lucrative. The Arellano Felix brothers were aggressive, politically connected, and willing to kill at scale. And they didn't view the Sinaloa faction as equals. They saw rivals, occupying territory they wanted. The war hadn't started yet, but the conditions for it were already in place. Palma and El Chapo spent the early 1990s building the Sinaloa operations infrastructure, trafficking routes, corrupt contacts inside law enforcement, distribution networks across the border. OCCRP describes Palma as a former Sinaloa leader who ruled alongside El Chapo during this period. Not a subordinate, a co-architect. They were building something designed to last. What they couldn't anticipate was the betrayal already being arranged. And the man arranging it was someone Palma trusted. Chapter 3. The murder that started everything. The details of what happened next exist in fragments. Some accounts name a Venezuelan trafficker called Rafael Clavel as the central figure. Others frame it as a direct operation by the Arellano Felix organization. Palma's wife, Guadalupe Leja Serrano, and his children were murdered. The killing wasn't random violence. It was a calculated message, sent through the people closest to him. In cartel logic, targeting a man's family serves a specific function. It isn't just revenge. It's a demonstration of reach. It says, we can get to anyone around you at any time, and there's nothing your power can do to stop it. For Palma, the message landed differently than intended. El País reported that for years after, Mexican authorities feared what Palma's freedom might trigger in old cartel enemies still operating. The murder didn't break him. It built his reputation into something almost mythological. In cartel culture, a man who absorbs that kind of loss and keeps operating doesn't just retain respect, he becomes a warning. And through the early 1990s, that warning had a body count. The Sinaloa-Tijuana conflict escalated steadily. In 1993, Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo was shot dead at Guadalajara's International Airport. 14 people died in the attack. The Mexican government pointed at cartel conflict as the cause. The cardinal caught in the crossfire of a war that had been building since the Partition. The killing sent shockwaves through the Mexican state, through the Catholic Church, and through the public. It forced a level of federal attention on cartel operations that Palma and his allies had managed to avoid. The crackdown that followed changed everything, but not in the way most people expected. Because by 1995, El Güero Palma was still operating, still moving through Mexico in a caravan that looked exactly like federal law enforcement. And that detail reveals something important about how his power actually worked. Chapter 4. The system inside the system. The most counterintuitive fact about El Güero Palma's operation isn't the violence. It's the paperwork. Reports describe Palma traveling with false federal judicial police identity documents and an armed convoy styled after official PJF protection details. From the outside, it looked like a federal law enforcement caravan. That wasn't a disguise he wore occasionally. It was an operational system. The Guadalajara Cartel had spent the 1980s building relationships inside Mexican federal institutions. Bribed commanders, operatives placed inside police units, protection agreements negotiated with regional officials. When the cartel fragmented, those relationships didn't disappear. They were inherited. Palma didn't need to hide from the Mexican state. He needed to look like the Mexican state. That's how a wanted man moves cargo, crosses checkpoints, and coordinates operations across multiple states without triggering federal intervention. The corruption wasn't incidental to the cartel's power. It was the infrastructure. Without it, the trafficking corridors were just roads. With it, they were protected supply chains. U.S. federal prosecutors understood this when they indicted Palma in 1995 for cocaine conspiracy. The indictment wasn't just about 50 kilograms of cocaine. It was about a system that could move product across borders precisely because it had access to the mechanisms of official authority. And by June 1995, that system had kept Palma free and operating for over a decade. Then came the plane. Chapter 5: 30 Years in a Legal Labyrinth. The crash on June 23, 1995, ended Palma's operational career. It did not end his story. What followed was 3 decades of legal combat across 2 countries. Mexico held him first. Then in 2007, he was extradited to the United States to face the 1995 cocaine conspiracy indictment. He pleaded guilty. Reports indicate a 16-year sentence. In June 2016, U.S. authorities released him and handed him to immigration officials for return to Mexico. He landed in Mexico and was immediately rearrested. New charges: the alleged 1995 killing of 2 Nayarit police officers. In May 2021, a federal judge ordered his release after acquitting him on organized crime charges. Federal prosecutors blocked it within days. He was placed under arraigo, a legal hold that allows continued investigation without formal charges. In July 2021, authorities rearrested him after overturning the acquittal. In May 2023, prosecutors filed a new arrest warrant to block another potential release. Every single time a court moved toward freeing him, the federal government found another mechanism to keep him inside. El País reported that the concern wasn't just legal. Authorities feared that releasing a man with Palma's history, his enemies, and his connections could trigger a new cycle of cartel violence. His freedom wasn't a judicial question. It was a national security calculation. And that detail reveals something that goes way beyond one man's case. It shows how deeply the cartel era of the 1980s and 90s embedded itself into Mexican institutions. The war Palma fought didn't end when he crashed into that hillside. It just moved into courtrooms. As of April 2026, Hector Luis Palma Salazar is 65 years old. He's held in Altiplano, Mexico's maximum security federal prison, the same facility that briefly held El Chapo before his 2015 tunnel escape. A federal judge recently ordered urgent medical attention after reports of serious health deterioration, spinal problems, concerns about untreated illness. The man who once moved through Mexico in a police convoy now needs a court order to receive basic medical care. Rafael Clavel, the man linked in multiple accounts to the murder of Palma's family, he's dead. The Arellano Felix organization that waged war against the Sinaloa faction has largely collapsed. El Chapo was convicted in a U.S. federal court in 2019 and is serving life in a Colorado supermax prison. The Sinaloa Cartel still operates, but the men who built it in those early years are either dead, imprisoned, or aging in cells. What Palma's story leaves behind isn't a blueprint for power. It's a record of what happens when institutions fail completely, when the state's enforcement tools get absorbed into the criminal networks they're supposed to stop, when personal tragedy and organizational violence become impossible to tell apart. The plane crash in 1995 felt like an ending. 30 years later, the courts are still arguing about what to do with what survived it. If you want to see the next shadow organization we're exposing, click and subscribe on the screen right now.